Actively managing your personal brand is critical if you want to make a significant impact in the areas of your life important to you. I'm Gary Brown, the Personal Brand Catalyst. I've spent most of my life working in the world of branding products. More recently, I've been exploring the world of personal branding and wrote a book on this, Brand New, Brand You. And the podcast has come out of this as a way to share first-hand experiences from some of Australia's most recognised personal brands. Caroline Gurney has been CEO of Future Generations since 2021, the charitable investment group who are Australia's first listed investment company to combine financial and social returns. Caroline has also served on the board since 2019. Caroline Gurney is well known in media circles and was the Managing Director and Head of Marketing and Corporate Communications for Australasia and Deputy Communication Officer for Asia Pacific of UBS. Prior to joining UBS in 2002, Caroline was Vice President and Director of Corporate Affairs for Asia Pacific at Citibank. In addition to her roles in Australia, she worked in Singapore, Hong Kong and London. Caroline is also a member of the Ascham School Council and the Centennial Park and Moore Park Trust, a director of Our Watch, a charity focused on preventing violence against women and children, and an ambassador for the Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, and former member of Chief Executive Women. Caroline, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. I know when you're running a public company, it's not something that you can just walk out and give it to your colleagues and say, I'll be back later on. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time out. And I want to start by asking you whether you see yourself as Caroline Gurney or whether you see yourself as the CEO of a public company.
Thank you, Gary. It's lovely to be here talking with you. That's a question I have pondered ever since you asked me to do this podcast. So I love brands. I really enjoy what they stand for. I've worked with some of the most important brands in the world for me in financial services. And I've never necessarily seen myself as a brand per se, but I do see myself as the CEO of Future Generation. And that is incredibly important to me because our shareholders, my team, they look to me to make the decisions. But I am also aided unbelievably by the boards that we have on Future Generation and also our chairs. So even though you might perceive me as a brand, I don't feel that I am a brand in terms of Caroline Gurney. I feel that for me, I want to be relevant. I want to do an exceptionally good job. But I've always felt that I've been part of a brand. And part of that brand is having integrity, gaining trust, working incredibly hard, because I want to, in a way, be part of that brand of the company I work for.
Where did the decision or did the company start in terms of making a selection for you as CEO as opposed to somebody else? Because if they didn't buy your brand, what did they buy to bring you in as CEO?
I believe with Future Generation, obviously I came from UBS, which I think is one of the great brands, a really truly recognised and trusted brand. And I'd worked for UBS for nigh on 18 years. And as part of that, I actually worked on the board of Future Generation Australia. So with Jeff Wilson, with a number of other amazing individuals. And I worked on the board for 3 years. And I think from that, what they saw was somebody that was truly invested in what Future Generation was about, that whole idea of having investment returns, but also having a social impact. And they felt that I could take it to the next stage of development. But I think they'd seen what I was doing when I was on the board. So they had a level of trust. They realized that I had the necessary skills, and they were there to make sure that I was supported in, going from a very, very large global organization to what is a much smaller, although very flexible, nimble boutique in many ways. I think it was trust, and it was also the belief that I would, take it to the next stage. So I understand in terms of my brand, but I suppose I see my brand as being somebody that will work incredibly hard and will be articulate about what we're trying to do and, deliver the message and the impact.
So could you see yourself running another organisation?
I'm only a year and a half into this one.
But as a CEO, you've taken a job as a CEO, and your abilities, everything you've expressed, are they transportable to another organisation, or is there something about your brand and your personal purpose that actually bolts you to FG?
So my personal, idea of what I want to do is I really want to make a difference. That is incredibly important to me. And I don't think I could be a CEO of any organisation that did not have a purpose.
Right.
So yes, of course I could work for another organisation because, if they were true to their values and they had purpose, yes, I could. But at the moment, for me, I'm quite dedicated to what I do, and I want to see that through to the next stage. But yes, all of our skills are transferable, without a doubt.
Right. So impact and purpose is very important for you in terms of an organisation. So what about values? Do the values that you espouse align with the values of the organisation?
Yes, definitely. That's incredibly important to me.
And how much, even though you were on the board for a period of time, you sometimes don't always see what goes on in the organisation and see those values. Did you do a due diligence when you, for example, came on the board? Did you understand what the values and whether they aligned with everything that you wanted?
Before that, I'd worked with Sown Hearts and Minds, which is obviously another listed investment company, but also previous to that was a conference. And that is where I talked to Louise Walsh and to Jeff Wilson. And Louise was the previous CEO, and Jeff obviously is the founder. And I loved what they were doing. And in terms of my due diligence, I spent a lot of time with the CEO and with the other board directors, really getting into the nitty-gritty of what they were doing. And their values and my values are totally aligned. And it's really important to have that. I think that if you don't believe in what you're doing, you will never be as good as you possibly could be, not just for yourself, but also for shareholders in the company.
Critical, absolutely critical. So with values in mind, have you ever been placed in a situation where you've had to make a decision based on values where there's been a conflict?
Yes. I mean, it was very early in my career. I mean, I just got my degree, and I was working for a small marketing company, and I remember it was a founder-led company, and the son was also working with the company. And I remember thinking the way he wants to take this company in one direction is not necessarily something that really rests well with me. It was more, for me, it wasn't about what we were trying to do for the companies. It was more about what he was trying to do as an individual. And that's when I thought, my goodness, this isn't something I feel comfortable with. And I decided to go to market and find another role because I knew that even when I spoke to them, it would have no impact.
Yeah.
And then I realized that any role you have to have an impact. You have to be able to be true to yourself in what you think and what you want to do. And that was a lesson I learned in my, early 20s. And it's really stood with me throughout time for every role I've subsequently taken.
Because it's, and look, you obviously can see that with the relationship you create and the business you've developed. But it's also unusual in a sense that when you look at the finance industry that has so many challenges, and reputation in some quarters is questionable in terms of organisations and the way they treat their customers, their staff, their stakeholders, etc., to actually navigate away from that. That must be a challenge at times.
I think in every role you have a challenge, no matter what you're doing. And for me, if there wasn't a challenge, I wouldn't engage as much as I possibly do. I mean, I think I'm very lucky. I worked for an amazing company in London called Lansons, and I'm now part of the alumni. And they were they are the top financial marketing agency in the UK. And actually, I still speak to the owners. And when you went into that firm, you identified with their values and what they really believed. And you got to work on accounts that you were really passionate about. Mm-hmm. So I worked on Fidelity, I worked on NatWest, I worked on, a variety of others. And when you worked hard and you did well, you became a partner quite quickly. So I became a partner. And I just remember thinking, this firm is so good, not only to its clients, but also to its people. And I remember thinking, I will work harder for this organization because, the culture is so good. And ever since then, I've never wanted to work for a company that didn't have a great culture.
Yeah.
And, that was when I was in my 20s. So, if you find a great culture, then that's something you never want to give up.
Absolutely. And I guess where I was going is when you look at the big banks here, UBS is a fabulous organisation, has a great culture.
It does.
And where you are today, no doubt, has an equally good culture because it has a great CEO that drives a good culture. But if you look at the banking inquiry which occurred and some of the material that came out of there, you'd question whether those sort of organisations had the right culture, the ones they did the investigation. So it's a matter of steering your way through to actually find the right organisation. And it is no doubt clear that you've been able to steer the course. So it's having the right radar and understanding of what you're looking for.
You're right. I mean, I think that, as you said, this is for younger people to learn, different people's directions. I remember in my 20s when I decided that I really wanted to go overseas, and I looked at lots and lots of different roles. And in your 20s, you get offered so much because you're at that, that time in your career where you're still a generalist. Yep. And you can do so many roles. So I went to work for Citigroup, which has also had trials and tribulations over the years. But I worked in Asia, and I was regional head for part of the consumer bank and the private bank. So I loved that role because the culture was incredibly strong. It was a new business in Asia in many ways. We had a very, very good management team that led. And I really believed in what they were doing because we were going out to new markets, and there was that real flight to quality after the Asian crisis. And so then coming to UBS, I've always thought Australia had an amazing culture, and I was very much part of that. But you're right, the Royal Commission, so much goes on in terms of the Aged Care Commission, also in terms of different commissions that have been going across the whole industry. But I think you pick an organisation that really works well for you, you understand the culture, you can be relevant and you can contribute. I think that's very important. I can't talk about the four main banks here. I've never worked for them, but I do know people that have worked for them that loved what they did. But I think also in those really big organisations, it's very hard to know what goes on in every different department. For my roles, I've always felt very in control of what we do. And it's always, everybody's been always able to have a say. But it's been hard sometimes, definitely been hard.
Can imagine, very much so. Which gets back to, I'm still focused on personal branding at the moment because have you ever thought about how people perceive you?
Yes, we had a number of years ago this amazing lawyer actually that worked for asset management. She did a presentation on personal brand, and it was probably 15 years ago. And I remember thinking, wow, that is what personal brand is about. And one of the questions she said, so did you decide to keep your maiden name? Yes, I did, because in the UK, I had a reputation. I was talking to various people, and if I'd rung up and said I'm Caroline blah blah blah, they were like, phone would have gone down, because it's actually a very, we live in a very tough world. It's very hard to, network and to get contacts and to keep in touch with them. So in terms of my personal brand, she identified 3 areas which you've talked about, especially in your book, and I really felt, for me, to be a trusted advisor and to be part of the conversation and to be, relevant and to work really hard, that they were the things that I identified from that. And so therefore, if you have a personal brand, I kind of think of somebody with a brand as like Madonna or Britney Spears, or I don't think personally as a brand, but I do think I am an individual that has integrity. And if that's my brand, I would be incredibly happy with that.
That is one component of your personal brand, is your integrity and your reputation. But people know you for much more than that, which actually gets back to your personal brand of it's holistic. And so if you pull yourself out of your work environment and put your hat on in your family environment, they look at you in a different way. Do they not?
Oh, they definitely do. Yeah. I mean, I'm a mother, I'm a wife.
Correct.
I have very solid friendships, and I'm incredibly caring, and I want to help people no matter what.
They're the qualities.
I will go out of my way to do that.
Yeah. And then you have your community engagement as well. So they don't look at you in a professional, they look at where you can support them. So you're a supporter and an enhancer of their values and the mission that they are trying to achieve in the community side. But that's not a CEO's hat.
No, it's not. You're right. I think for me, I'm obviously on a few boards. I'm on Our Watch, which is, one of the largest not-for-profits that really looks at making sure women don't have any violence of them or their children. So that's government funded, and we do have some philanthropy as well. But I'm on the board there, and I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved. But there you're influencing and you're advising and you're door opening. It is a very different set of skills that you employ, but they are all the skills that I have, and if I can use them to help others, that's important.
And Our Watch is a really good example of an organisation that does great work because of the people involved, but people generally don't know the brand. If you did a barometer, people wouldn't know what Our Watch was.
You're right. But I also think we are gaining more of a name as sort of in the sector and the relevance, but we are a backbone organisation. So we put the research together, and where we are now is perfect for now. But I think in future that will definitely change, and that's something we're working on.
They're using your brand to get somewhere, is my point. And all those members of the board are their own brands, and Our Watch is using the board members' brands to move it forward, not their own.
Yes. And we all need to work really hard to do that.
Absolutely.
So, and we have a very diverse board, one that has incredible knowledge and depth of the sector, but also many other sectors, mine being finance. We have politicians, we have Indigenous, leaders. It's a fabulous board to be part of as well, because we're all learning from each other.
Correct. And so when you talk about Indigenous, your ambassadorialship for the Australian
AIEF, Australian Education Indigenous Foundation. Yes.
Again, they're using your brand. Are they not?
They are. They have a number of ambassadors.
I know, but they don't put an ambassador on just for name. It's actually because of the brand, the reputation.
Yes. I mean, you're right. It's one of those things you don't actually question. No, I don't. I always try and think about.
It's your passion that they are, your passion for Indigenous that has got you involved and interested and allowed them to give you that ambassadorialship. But it's actually your brand that is actually delivered to them, and you are reaping the benefits from satisfaction of being able to support them.
It's immensely satisfying. I mean, it's the very first thing that I did when I pretty much arrived in Australia, when originally they were raising money for St Joseph's School, Joe is, and being part of that was really important to me. I mean, I come from the UK. You know, we live with the IRA and everything that entails for a number of years, and I always believe that where you can help, you should help.
Absolutely. Yeah, it actually, I think too many people think that it's all one way when in fact it is two way. For the best way to actually help others or help yourself is to help others, because the reciprocity of satisfaction is immense.
And I really believe that, you know, for a healthy economy, you need healthy communities, and therefore you need healthy people. So, you know, if I can be part of that for me is immensely satisfying, but also it's really relevant in today, the world we live in. Like, we have to do more. Everybody has to do more. The government can't be relied on to do it everything.
Totally agree. We talked a little bit earlier about reputation. When was the first time that you can recall that reputation actually was something that was important to you personally?
I think my reputation it's always been important, but I do remember one incident where I worked in media beforehand, and we were dealing with quite a complex transaction, and the deal was going through, and I remember somebody say to me, "Just tell them this," and I was like, "But what do you mean, just tell them this? I'm not willing to say that. I don't understand what it is, for a start, and I don't necessarily think it's the right thing to say." And I remember ringing this journalist and saying, "I really think that it is this, but I actually don't know." And I remember thinking, actually, I'm not going to say anything because my reputation is more important. This is one deal, and the idea that I might mislead somebody is something I'm not willing to do. And, you know, I've always stuck by that. There is no point not telling somebody the truth, or you just do a no comment. And I've seen time and time again where people have, you know, thought that they could get away with something. And, you know, I really believe that everything you should say, if it's published the next day in the paper on the front page, that's something you should go home to your mother and say, "Yes, I said that."
Correct. Totally agree. I think that makes or breaks an individual is reputation. If you got no reputation, you ain't going anywhere.
I mean, I think it's fundamental. And I think when you're younger, you don't actually realise. You don't realise how important it is to be honest to yourself, but also honest to others.
So we'll go back to branding for a sec, because you still don't believe you're a brand, but you do, or you have expressed some hint that yes, maybe there are elements that people see as a brand. When was it all so important to you that you actually had to position yourself to stand out from the crowd, to actually go for a role? I imagine, you know, you went to Larson's, you just didn't turn up. They chose you because of something that they saw in you that you probably hadn't seen in yourself, or maybe you had, that got you that job. And then there are other roles where you'd obviously been in a suite of candidates or selected as one of candidates to go forward. What is it that you or they saw that actually you learned from being selected that helped you understand maybe a little bit more about your brand and what value you add or added to that particular role?
A good example was when I was working in Asia and working for Citigroup, and I was about to move to Australia with Citigroup, and I spoke to Gordon Dickinson, who was the sort of co-CEO with Chris Mackay, and I remember talking to them about why I wanted to come to Australia. And they said to me, so what can you offer us? We are the number one investment bank in Australia. You know, why would we employ you? We've never seen you. These were phone conversations. And I remember saying, I've worked in London, I've worked in Singapore, I've worked in Japan, and I listed all these countries I'd worked in. And I said, and I understand how the media works in every single country that I've worked in. I have made a difference. I have worked for the foundation for Citigroup. I worked on microfinance and a number of other things. And I really believe that I can bring you something different. And he was like, well, what's different? And I said, well, I really believe that, one, I have a very different perspective to what you normally get. And I think that's really important if you want to differentiate yourself, not only in Australia, but also in Asia Pacific. And afterwards, Chris Mackay pretty much offered me the job. So it was a really hard conversation. You kind of have to dig deep because you don't expect those questions so immediately, like, well, what do you bring? You know, we have an amazing market in Australia. Why do you think you can do the job better? And also I had to admit that I actually had never done investment banking. And I said, but it's something I will definitely learn, and I will learn it quick. It was a really enlightening moment to have an interview where you have to define what you can do and what you can bring, because I really, really wanted the role. And
when push comes to shove, no doubt you can do it.
Well, I did do it I came in at a relatively junior rank and, ended up on the board and also on the board for Asia Pacific. So yes, but I worked unbelievably hard to get there. I'm
quite sure you did, because the banking industry
shows
tough. No mercy whatsoever.
You can't make mistakes. And if you do, you own up immediately, you move on, and you make sure you never do it again.
Yeah. But the points you just raise about doing things differently and understanding the customer and having that clarity obviously was something that knocked them right between the eyes.
I think people don't really understand when you work in corporate affairs that you actually have lots of different customers. You have not only your internal clients, and there are numerous internal clients, and everybody has a vested interest in their reputation, the reputation of the firm, which is incredibly important because, not only as an individual you judge, but so is the organisation. And also just the people that you're trying to, talk to and influence. And there are numerous journalists, numerous other opinion formers, and you have to get a network really quickly, and you have to find a lot of supporters very quickly. And it's hard when you come to a new country and you have to do that. You have 6 months, and that definitely takes a toll.
So let's take that a little bit further, because in that space of corporate affairs and communication, the stakeholders change, the customers change, the journalists change. How do you maintain your relevance? I mean, what techniques did you employ to ensure that you maintained your relevance inside the organisation so that they saw you as delivering and then externally continually delivering?
That's a really good question. Sometimes you get it wrong, sometimes you get it right. But I think for me, it was just making sure that I was really consistent and that I continually brought people on the journey with me. And I communicated all the time. And I would really network. I would go to pretty much everything I possibly could. And I was very professional about it. And if people were looking for somebody to do something, I would do it. I would put my hand up and say, I'll do that. I remember sitting down with Matthew Grounds, who obviously is a brilliant banker, and Chris Mackay, and just going through the whole, all of the journalists, all of the opinion formers, everything, and we just looked at the whole environment and we worked out a plan. And then I just put that into action. But I've always had really good sort of, not necessarily mentors or coaches, but I've always had really good leaders that I could go to. I've always tried to make sure that I go to the people who are the best at what they do and ask advice.
And does that help you stay relevant?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're part of something and you're always asking for more and going out of your way to do something to help others, I think that makes you relevant, and having an opinion really counts.
I agree with you. In your current role, you've got a wide diversity of shareholders, stakeholders, whose potentially their views of the world change, their ambitions change. How are you keeping your relevance, maintaining that relevance in the current environment? And where is it, and what is your plan, or do you have it? You don't need to explain, but do you have a plan to maintain that relevance going forward?
I always have a plan. I mean, I remember sitting down and somebody said, "Where's your 3-year plan?" I was like, "Oh, I've only got a 1-year plan." I was like, "God, I need to do 3 years, maybe 5 years." So yes, I do have a plan. As you're right, with Future Generation, we have 15,000 shareholders, and all of them have completely different aims. But I think you can only really do your best. Like, you read as much as you possibly can. You read every single newspaper, and now I read blogs, and I look at social media all the time, and I read textbooks from various gurus. But I also obviously read novels, because you need to have conversations with people. Like, you need to connect. For me, it's just about getting out and seeing as many shareholders as possible. I mean, I believe in roadshows. I believe in going out and talking to shareholders, but I also really believe that you take people who are experts at what they do with you. So, for example, we have amazing not-for-profits and we have amazing fund managers. So I will take them with me where necessary, because you can't be expected to know everything. And sometimes relevancy is bringing the right person with you.
Absolutely, and also relevancies about the perception that people have of you as to whether you are yesterday's or tomorrow's. And that's a challenge for all of us, because the speed of which business and everything else happens is incredibly fast.
I personally think that if you give back, or if you give more, you're always going to be relevant, because people will want to understand why you're doing that. And for me, philanthropy, social impact, I mean, the government said they're going to double it by 2030. So everybody that can be part of that conversation is relevant. Yep. And I think for our lives and what we're doing, we all need to be relevant and have a say in that.
Do you think you're relevant with all your friends? Do you actually see... And I'm using this as I've had a couple of instances where I have some very good friends and they've stopped working because they're at that age. And I find that their engagement is quite different, because they've lost their relevance, because their brand was tied up with the organisation in which they worked, as opposed to their own personal brand. And so their whole orientation is quite different. Have you got friends or situations like that?
I have a very small but varied group of friends, and the majority of them, they do work, and whether or not that's bringing up their children or whether or not that's working for not-for-profits or working in, public listed companies, I find that I get different things from each of them, and vice versa. And we all have children. The majority of my friends have children, and they are really relevant to me, because your children go through different stages. Absolutely. All the time, even when they're grown up, and my daughter, whenever she's 30, like, I know that I'll be seeking guidance from others that have a 30-year-old. So for me, it's never really been about what they do. in terms of their job. It's always been about who they are. Correct. And what they can and what they give to all of our different friendships. I think that's, I've never judged people on what they have. It's really about
who they are.
Who they are.
Totally agree. And that's what I was sort of inferring, is the engagement is different. And I think that's it's really interesting that people sometimes look at others purely because of the role they have.
Without a doubt. I mean, aren't we sort of, we're kind of guided to do that. Like, people that are CEOs of these major corporations just think, wow, they're amazing. But, sometimes when you get to know them, they are amazing, and sometimes they're not.
And you probably heard that the day that Joe stepped down, the phone stopped ringing, and they couldn't work out why.
And I think that would be very hard.
Yeah, very much so. In terms of kickstarting your career, you mentioned you had a number of people, leaders, maybe mentors, those who probably helped you along the way. Are there any that stick in your mind as really giving you good, sound advice and guidance that have stuck with you on a long-term basis? Or even on a short-term basis, but have made a great impact on your life, your career?
I mean, obviously, in terms of the way I was brought up, that was really important and sort of gave me fundamental skills, but also just, they taught me to be loyal, they taught me to be faithful, they taught me, so many different things. But my grandmother, I mean, she grew up in Sheffield, and they worked in the coal mines, and, her brother worked in the coal mines. When they were closed, he went to London and he worked on the tubes. And she always said to me, just be happy in your work, be happy in your friendships. And that's always really stuck with me. Like, you can change your jobs lots of times perhaps, but in terms of your friendships, that's something you work at, like your husband and your family. So family's always been fundamentally important to me. And I go to my husband, Matthew, continually for guidance. And he would probably be the person that I respect the most in terms of opinions. But in terms of others in other roles, I've been incredibly lucky. I've often been the only female in the room, and I have been guided by lots of amazing women and lots of amazing men. And without them, I probably wouldn't be where I am now. I mean, I'm very happy to talk about some of them.
So on that basis, is that something that you have considered undertaking, mentoring of younger people, to give them the same sort of opportunity that you've had?
I find it very hard to say no. So when somebody asks me for help, I'm like, yes, right, let me see what I can do. I mean, I've mentored a lot of younger women. I've mentored a few younger men, not many, but in terms of women, I've mentored a lot. And it's usually been a stage in their career when they're thinking about changing something, or whether they're within these big organizations working out how to navigate them. I've successfully navigated a few, so I'm very happy to help there. I've mentored this amazing Indigenous woman through Australian Indigenous Education Foundation, which I found incredibly fulfilling, and I learnt a lot. I mean, it's easy to say I learnt more from her than she did from me, but I think we were really beneficial to each other. I really believe that mentoring somebody is really important, and although I'm not necessarily mentoring somebody officially now, you're always mentoring somebody.
Absolutely right. So is there any advice that you would give some of the younger people who are watching this podcast that have been learnings or insights of your career so far that could be of value when they are starting out, or they are trying to build their reputation and their personal brand?
I think it's really hard when you're starting out. I think it's really difficult to get good roles and to excel in some of them. So for me, it's always about try and try again. And I really believe the more you try, you will definitely get there in the end. And sometimes it's going to take time. I think you have to be really patient with your career and with your, in terms of what you stand for as an individual. And, change is good. So if you change industries, or if you change your mind about something, you learn more about yourself as an individual. And for me, it's really about asking questions. Ask questions as much as you can, because people will notice you. And you need to be noticed. There are so many, there's so many brilliant young people, and you need to stand out. But you don't need to stand out by, jumping up and down all the time. You can stand out by asking a relevant question, being there and saying, yes, can I do that? Or even asking for a challenge and being present. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's critical. Being present. Caroline, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I've thoroughly enjoyed today, and I wish you much success in your journey in building what is a fabulous organisation in future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe for more episodes. And if you'd like to learn more about developing your personal brand, please visit garybrown.com.au to get in touch or grab a copy of Brand New, Brand You.